Good morning. Today we're going to work on solving systems by substitution. We're going to work on two variables, two equations. So the TEKS that this is following is Algebra 1, A.5C. Solve systems of two linear equations with two variables from mathematical and real-world problems. Today we're not going to focus on the real world. We're just going to focus on the mathematical. So what is substitution method? Substitution method is a method that we're going to try to solve for one variable first. We're going to take whatever we find and substitute it back into the other equation. And when we do that, we'll be able to solve for one of the variables. And after we solve for one of the variables, we take that solution and we plug it into the second equation. So this example down here, my forewarning to you is that work on these problems can look different because you have choices that you can make. You're going to have to pick one of the equations and choose X or Y to solve for. Now, no matter how you work this out with substitution, your answer should still come out the same. So again, work might look different, but answer should still come out the same. So we're going to look at our two equations. Now for substitution method, you get to choose to pick solving this top one for X or Y or solving the bottom one for X or Y. Of course, there are things to look for. Looking for a 1 in front of it would make solving easier. So you know what? This bottom one is going to be easier to solve for. And if there is a positive 1, that's the best thing to choose. So I'm actually going to take this bottom one, and I'm going to solve this one for X, since it is a positive 1X. So how do I solve that bottom one for X? Well, I'm going to add Y to both sides. So now I have X equals 13 plus Y. Now I'm going to take that 13 plus Y, okay, because 13 plus Y is X. And I'm going to come back to the first equation. And in place of X, I'm going to use parentheses. And I'm going to write 13 plus Y. And everything else stays the same. Now the whole purpose of substitution, if you look at that equation, is I don't have any more X's. So this allows me to actually solve for Y. So again, what I did in blue there is I substituted the 13 plus Y in place of X. Next, I'm going to distribute the 4 into the parentheses. Then I have 52 plus 4Y plus 2Y equals 10. Combine like terms, I have 52 plus 6Y equals 10. Subtract 52 from both sides. 6Y equals negative 42. The next step is to divide by 6 on both sides. Y equals negative 7. You have found one of your variables. Okay? Then we're going to go back and we're going to grab what we solved for here. We know that X equals 13 plus Y. So X equals 13 plus Y. I just went ahead and rewrote it. But guys, I already solved for Y. So I'm going to take that value and I'll plug it back in there. 13 plus negative 7, or we can do 13 minus 7. My X value is 6. I have solved for X and Y now. The last step is to write it as an ordered pair. So my answer is 6, negative 7. Now, these are the only two numbers that if I plug them back into both equations, they're going to make both of the equations true. Okay? Let's try it again. Now, we are looking at example number 2. You have a choice. Which equation do you want to solve for? Again, you're looking to pick the easiest one is to pick an X or Y that's by itself. Okay, so this bottom one looks a little bit easier. Now, you can solve for Y or you can solve for X. There is no positive 1, so it's your choice. Now, I see a 21 here and I see a 2. I really don't want to divide by 2, so I'm not going to solve for Y. I'm going to solve for X. But again, you have a choice and your work might look different, but in the end, the answer comes out the same. So I chose to solve the bottom one for x. So to solve for x, I'm going to subtract 2y from both sides. So negative x equals 21 minus 2y. Well, it's a negative x. Be very careful with those negatives. How do I get rid of a negative 1 in front of the x? I divide everything by negative 1. So x equals negative 21 plus 2y. Now I'm going to take that and I need to plug it into the other equation that I did not choose. And I'm going to plug it in place of x. And remember that when you're substituting the value back in, you must put parentheses around it. So now we have 7 parentheses. And we're going to plug that in right here wherever x was. And then we bring down the rest of the equation. The next step is to distribute into your parentheses. You have negative 147 plus 14y plus 2y equals negative 19. Next step is to combine like terms. Negative 147 plus 16y equals negative 19. The next step is to solve for y. How do I move that negative 147 over? I add 147 on both sides. Then I have 16y equals positive 128. Next step is to divide by 16 on both sides. When I divide by 16, I get y equals 8. So I have solved for one variable. Now I'm going to come back to the equation that I solved for x, and I'm going to take that 8, and I'm going to plug it into the y value. So x equals negative 21 plus 2 times 8. 2 times 8 is 16. X equals negative 21 plus 16 is negative 5. You have now solved for both of your variables. Your final answer is an ordered pair, x, comma, y. Not the order that you solved them for. You come back and make sure x, comma, y. Okay. Now, go ahead and, well, you're going to try number 3 on your own. But before you begin, let's go ahead and look at these and kind of make a decision together. Which one of these looks easier to solve for? You have a choice. Now, I'm always going to look for a letter by itself. Okay, this top one has a letter by itself. So I am going to solve for y. So go ahead and pause this and try number 3 on your own. Hopefully you come out to 3 comma negative 8. So here is what we did. Like I agreed upon, we took this top one and solved for y. So first I subtracted 4x from both sides. Then I had to divide by negative 1, which means all the signs changed. So I took what I boxed here and I plugged it in place of y. So I went back to this equation. So this was step 1. This was step 2 where I substituted it back into y. The next step was to distribute, combine like terms, subtract 40 from both sides, divide by negative 10. Whatever you get here, you're going to go back to what you boxed, and you're going to plug this back into here. So negative 20 plus 4 times 3, negative 20 plus 12. The answer is negative 8, and there is my ordered pair. And all we're going to do today is just practice that same thing, okay? So question number 4, which equation looks easiest to solve for? Okay. What I said is to find an equation that has a 1 in front of it. There's only one equation out of these two that has a 1 coefficient, and that's this top one. So we're going to take this top equation and solve for y. Now remember, you do not have to do it that way, but when we do that, it's because that usually involves less steps, okay? So we're going to take that top equation and solve for y. So step 1, how do I solve the top equation for y? I'm going to add 5x to both sides. So y equals -2 plus 5x. Now we're going to take what I solved for, and I'm going to substitute it back into the second equation. So step 2 is to take the second equation, and now in place of y, I'm going to plug in -2 plus 5x. Now I'm going to distribute into my parentheses. Now this is going to allow me to solve for x by itself. So 3x minus 12 plus 30x equals -12. Combine like terms. I have 33x minus 12 equals -12. Now I'm going to add 12 to both sides. Well, when I add 12 to both sides, I get 0. And that's okay. 0 is a number. The next step is to divide by 33. My x is 0. Now I'm going to come back to step 1. I'm going to take what I boxed here, and I'm going to plug that 0 in here to solve it. So step 3, y equals -2 plus 5 times 0. Y equals -2. My final answer is an ordered pair. So this is your final answer. Again, I want you to try number 5 on your own. I'm actually not going to pick which variable for you to solve for. So make a choice. When you unpause it, the answer is going to be there. And your work might look different, but the answer should still be the same. Okay. You should have gotten -5, -1. Okay. So here's how I did it. I chose the top equation, solve for x. Then I substituted that back in, distributed, combined my y's, added 14 to both sides, divided by -5. Then I took my y value and I substituted it back in for my first equation that I solved for x. My final answer is x comma y, so -5 comma -1. Okay, let's do number 6 together. Again, we got to pick. So this one we have a positive x here or a positive y here. So again, your choice which one you want to solve for. I'm going to go ahead and do the top one. So I'm going to take the top one and I'm going to say x minus 2y equals -6. I'm going to move the 2y over by adding 2y to the other side. So I solved for one variable first. Step 2 is once I solve for one variable, I want you to substitute it into the other equation. So I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to substitute it in for the x value since that is what I solved for. Okay. Then I distribute the 2 into the parentheses. Next is combine like terms. Then I add 12 to both sides. Then the next step is to divide by 5. And you have solved for your first variable. The next main step, and I'm being very specific here in case you have to write an essay or in case you have to explain it in words, in case you have to do a proof. These words are very important. The third main step is to take the variable you solve for and to plug it into the other equation. So x equals -6 plus 2y, and the y that I just found was 2. So I substitute it back in. X equals -6 plus 4. -6 plus 4 is x equals -2. So my final answer is -2, 2. So the words, I'm being very careful with these words, and you make sure you understand so that if you have to put them in words, you can put them in words. Now go ahead and try number 7 on your own. Pause it. When you come back to it, the answer will be there. Okay, hopefully you got 2, -2, and I know that these look related, they're not. Okay, so I chose to solve this bottom one for y since the y had a 1 in front of it. So when I moved the 2x over, I got positive 2x. Then I substituted this into the other equation in place of y since that's the variable I know. Distributed, combined like terms, added 12 to both sides. Once I solved for x, I went back up here and I plugged it into this number. So I got -6 plus 2 times 2. I got y equals -2, and here's my answer. Okay, number 8. I'll do this one with you guys. So I'm going to choose to solve this bottom one for x because the coefficient in front of x was 1. So my first step would be to add 3y to the other side. My first major step is to pick one equation and solve for a variable. The next main step is to plug that in, to substitute it back into the other equation that you did not use. When you substitute it back in, you must use parentheses. Okay? Then you distribute into your parentheses. The next step is to combine like terms. Okay. Now I'm going to add 9 to both sides, because how do you move this -9 over? You add it here, you add it here. What's 13 plus 9? The answer is 22. The next step is to divide by 11 on both sides. We get y equals 2. The last main step is to take the variable that you have found your solution to and to plug it back into the other equation. So x equals -3 plus 3 times 2. X equals -3 plus 6. So x equals 3. My final answer is 3, 2. And if you substitute them back in, they need to make both equations true. Not just one of them. They need to make both equations true. So number 9, again, I'm going to let you do this one on your own. Pause the video. When you come back to it, the answer is going to be there. Hopefully your answer came out to 1, -3. Okay, so again, I'm going to explain very, very detailed in case you need to do this in a proof, okay? The first step was to pick an equation and solve for one of the variables. I chose this bottom equation. Now, don't forget, your work might look different, and that's okay as long as this is what you got. So I chose to solve the bottom one for x. Now, I had a -x, so I had to divide everything by -1. So I have x equals -8 minus 3y. The second main step is to substitute that back into the equation you did not use in place of x. When you substitute it back in, you need to make sure that you put parentheses around it. Then you distribute into your parentheses. The next step would be to combine like terms. Now I'm going to add 24 to both sides, and I got 33. The next step is to divide by negative 11 on both sides, and my answer came out to y equals negative 3. Once you solve fully for a variable, you're going to go and plug it back into the original equation. So negative 8 minus 3 times what you just found, and my answer came out to x equals 1. Ordered pair x comma y. There's only 2 more questions to do, so go ahead and work out number 10 completely on your own and be ready to explain how you worked it out. Okay, hopefully you came out to negative 1 comma 3. Okay, so here is what I did. When I said explain your steps, this is what I'm looking for if this was in text. First, you have to pick an equation and solve for one of the variables. I chose the top equation because I saw that the y had no coefficient. I mean, it has a negative 1 though. So I did have to divide by negative 1, and it changed both of these signs. Once you solve for one of the variables, you plug it into the equation that you did not use in place of y. The next step is to distribute inside your parentheses. After that, we're going to combine like terms. So 4x plus 15x was 19x, plus 30 equals 11. Subtract 30 from both sides, and you get negative 19. Divide by 19, you get x equals negative 1. Then you're going to take that solution, and you're going to plug it into the original equation. So you can't plug it back into itself. Plug it back into the original equation in place of x. So 6 plus 3 times negative 1, that becomes 6 minus 3, and the answer comes out to 3. And there's your final answer. So the last question for substitution, number 11. Go ahead and pause this video, work it out, and when we come back, your solution will be there. Okay, our final answer for the second one was 3 comma negative 4. Here is how I did this one. I chose the bottom one, and I chose to solve for x because the x had a positive 1 in front of it. And I got 11 plus 2y. Then I substituted it back into the other equation in place of x, and make sure you put parentheses around it. The next step is to distribute inside your parentheses. The next step was to combine like terms. Then I added 77 to both sides, and I divided by negative 16. My final answer for y was negative 4. Then I take the negative 4 and I plugged it back into the equation in place of y, again with parentheses. So it became 11 minus 8, and my answer came out to 3. Okay. Thank you for watching this video. If it helped you at all, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe to this channel, I will be doing solving by elimination, and I'm going to do some real world problems. Have a great day.